Warcraft 1 released November 1994. World of Warcraft released November 2004. That's a decade. Dragonflight was released last November, and if the next expansion has the same release window, then it will drop November 2024. That's the 10th expansion, releasing on WoW's 20th anniversary and the franchise's 30th. So no doubt Blizzard are planning something big, but what if I told you there's already tons of evidence that has masked? What could celebrate the 30-year legacy of Azeroth more than rebuilding her from the ground up? With today's sponsor. Squarespace.com/Bellular Gaming, the place to get yourself set up on the web. I mean, man, been in the middle of setting up a bunch of things, changing some things on our job site, and that is where, man, their super user-friendly editor and their award-winning templates have just been absolutely clutch. It lets me get the design work that I need to get done super quick. I mean, there's nothing worse than being on a really tight timeline, struggling to get things to work, and that is why Squarespace just works. Their site builder is just so easy to use regardless of your past experience, and they've got so many great features like memberships, e-commerce, handling your mailing list. They really do democratize having a web presence. I mean, as an example, a lot of professional and student portfolios come my way. They land in my inbox easily weekly. Now, you know, the ones that really stand out, if they've got really good formatting, really nice layout and all of that, well, the good web design really makes it shine. It gives me a first impression. It makes me, as the person who is looking at this site, it makes me think, oh, they get design. They're putting their thing together intelligently. It just gives a good impression, and Squarespace will allow you to have that absolutely killer portfolio that shows you kind of know what you're about, you know what you're doing. And they'll let you do so more than just that. You know, if you're a local business, an online seller, a student about to embark on your career, Squarespace is the place to go. So build your site for free today, for free, with my link, and then use code BellularGaming for 10% off an annual plan when you're ready to send it live. That's squarespace.com/BellularGaming. Azeroth just had a time skip, but did you notice? I mean, did you actually feel it? Sure, Lordaeron and Bellular are married, but you'd think we'd see more change in a world that's moved on 5 years since we last saw it before we went to the Shadowlands. You look out at Kalimdor and the Eastern Kingdoms, and you see a world that should be different after 12 years of advancement since the Cataclysm. But it still burns with those fires. Outside of Stormwind and Orgrimmar, very little in the world has actually changed. Like, did you know that Durotar now needs to import its water from Mulgore because the goblins in Ishara have polluted the local water? What would orc shamans think about that? Or places like Ashenvale, the Barrens, and the Plaguelands. Surely, after everything we've done for the Cenarian Circle, Earthen Ring, and the Silver Hand, these places are a little bit more back to normal. Hell, even the Orc Heritage planted a seed for that. The player helps plant the first few trees of a new forest in Thunder Ridge. All this seems ethereal, but we in fact know that we are going to see at least some of these events in-game. Steve Denuser said as much in his official statement on the time skip. Here it is. Reclaiming Gilneas won't be seen in lore books or locked behind time passing. It's something we're going to experience in-game. So maybe we don't need to feel the time skip immediately. Maybe it is something for when we return from the Dragon Isles. It would be a significant job for Blizzard to rebuild Gilneas. And then, of course, you look out the old world and you realize the magnitude of revamping all 40 original zones, and that's not including the likes of Hyjal or Uldum. Huge job, right? Well, this is where we kick into gear, because they wouldn't be able to do it all in one production cycle. They would probably need to build this up over several expansions. Looking back, the first major signs of this were in Battle for Azeroth. That is when Blizzard got to grips with what it would take to revamp a zone. And they actually did that in Arithai Highlands and Darkshore with the Warfronts. That's content, back then in BFA, but also testbeds for the realities of bringing zones into the modern era. There wasn't much in the way of structural change, but they took Stromgarde and they made it into a modern Alliance fortress, bringing a relic of Warcraft 2 into the Fourth War. Blizzard then wrestled with some of the game's oldest content, giving Arathi Basin and Warsong Gulch a full facelift. They look gorgeous now. Hell, they casually scarred Tirisfal, plagued the Undercity, and burnt Teldrassil down. They know how to work in their old zones. Throughout these updates, the amount of potential asset reuse for a full world revamp has got completely insane, and most people haven't noticed it. World of Draenor brought Orc and Draenei architecture into the modern world. Legion gave us Val Shara, a vision of what a modern Ashenvale could be. Battle for Azeroth was so filled with classic feeling assets that you would be able to, using those, rebuild the likes of Stormwind, Gilneas, Undercity, any Troll Zone, or any Desert Zone. That all locked into place with the Dragon Isles, because the Isles are full of HD remodels of old world NPC fodder like Gnolls, Furbolgs, and Centaur. So imagine if they also did Kobolds. There you go, Elwyn Forest could be full of new bad guys. We also could, if you wanted to extend systems, have renowned tracks with updated Felwind, Furbolgs, after our time perhaps, learning things with the Winter Belt. Now, we then have both the story and the assets for, let's say, a united Centaur horde coming out of Desolace to lay waste to Thunderbuff. Now that all sounds kind of compelling, but that's just the stuff we're seeing in-game. And that's why it's time to check out the stuff that Blizzard haven't put in the game, but have actually made. This is when things turn almost from a theory to potentially something that's actually going to happen. Seriously, just look at this stuff for a second and let your imagination run away. Check out what a HD retextured Elwyn could look like. Here is the Goldshire Inn, the house beside the Crystal Lake, barnyards, windmills, lumber mills, mines. These one-to-one scale with the assets that exist as is in the world, and they could be placed without even having to move NPCs about. Literally, swap them over. How they're labeled is also fascinating. Check out these human and orc assets. This is base building stuff, walls, towers, and gates. Each is labeled Expansion 9. Which is actually the one that we're in, but each file ends with a 10 and then the race's name. Remember that Expansion 9 is game version 10, right? And it gets more intriguing then when we look at the Night Elf stuff that we're finding in the patch 10.1 PTR. There seems to be pretty clear math here. Masses of old world assets are being made. They're being put into the game files, they're in the game build, but they're just not in Azeroth, they're not in the game. Maybe they'll all be used this expansion, like these Blood Elf interior decorations. These ultimately, they got us a little bit excited, but it turns out that they were, at least for now, just used for the Horde side of the Dragonscale expedition. But the thing is, if Silvermoon was to get an update, this stuff is exactly what you'd put in it. And there's more. This is the thing that really nailed it for me. Check out, right, this data-mined Ironforge guard. What's up with him? If they're updating our guards specifically with the emblem of Ironforge on the shield and the tabard for players, surely they want to update our cities, right? So that's what we're actually seeing. But one thing above all else points toward a revamp. The world itself. The story is ready to advance. Azeroth is just crying out for a revamp, and we'll start where Blizzard have actually pointed to some action being, and that is Lordaeron. It was the heart of so much of what Warcraft once was. The Seven Kingdoms, Arthas Menethil, High Elves, but now it's a wasteland left to time. The big one is Gilneas. Genn was in the spotlight throughout Legion and BFA. He's now a major advisor to the Alliance, but he's also a king of a kingdom. His next arc will be acting like one and reclaiming his land. And we even have a decent idea of how it will play out. The Forsaken have retreated from Gilneas. They're licking their wounds after the Fourth War and all of that madness, but there is still trouble brewing. Ivar Bloodfang and his pack have taken Shadowfang Keep and jealously guard its evil artifacts. the pack are now so feral, Matthias Shaw worries how they will even remain our allies. In Silverpine and Tirisfal, the Forsaken, once a cult of personality to Sylvanas, now find themselves without their leader. And of course, with a lot of justifiable guilt over the war. There's a new council set up to lead them into the future, but there is potential for some strife and story there, especially over Kalia being on that council. The one thing they unanimously agree on, though, is that the Forsaken deserve a home. But Lordaeron doesn't belong to just the Forsaken. Humanity is making a comeback. The Scarlets have been spreading propaganda. I believe patch 8.1 of BFA added this, and it's not been picked up on much since. So their propaganda, which was in some leaflets that you found in-game, they talk about having a true living heir to the Menethil dynasty in hiding. They will be back. They've been set up to return, but they don't seem like much of a grand military order as they were in the past. They're perhaps more fringe conspiracy people. And they aren't the only humans on the scene. By now, with the Silver Hand and Cenarian Circle working on it since vanilla, you'd really think the Plaguelands wouldn't be so plagued anymore. If we see an update there, it might even go back to being called the Eastweald. Of course, there are still some remaining Scourge warlords and dark whispers of necromancy coming out of Scholomance. This is all stuff told to us in exploring Azeroth, but finally seeing the results of our efforts would be a huge moment in WoW. And if you want a bigger moment for, I don't know, a cinematic reveal, the Silver Hand have attempted to reclaim Stratholme several times since Legion. And with its history, it would be the perfect place to tell new stories for non-Stormwind humans. Arthas' damage undone, that kind of thing. But as much as humanity may be getting a free ride with Gilneas and resettling the Plaguelands, the real biggest player in the region is Silvermoon. Since it was sacked by Arthas in the Third War, they've long been on the road to recovery. But now, Silvermoon has been united with Suramar, creating twin elven kingdoms that could very much decide the future of Horde politics and establish what post-war Azeroth could look like. We're seeing new generations of Blood Knights and Magisters come along, like Solandria, once a regular of Children's Week in-game, now a fully fledged light-swinging paladin. Which brings me to perhaps the most exciting aspect of a revamp. Vanilla launched with many young people in the lore, but other than Anduin, we've seen very few of them grow up. And one of those youths that I think most players have completely forgotten about is about to come of age and wield about as much power as Anduin does, and that is Dagranthusarian II, who is the heir to the united dwarven kingdoms of Khazmodan. The gateway to the north is Khazmodan, the mountain kingdoms of the dwarves. But it's no longer just the Bronzebeards in charge. Magni's daughter, Moira, was captured by Dagranthusarian I, and when we turned up to liberate her, we discovered they were actually in love, and Moira had a son. That son is now the rightful king of the Dwarven Kingdoms, and when he comes of age, which is going to happen in 2 to 3 game years, he will replace the Council of the Three Hammers and become the king of Ironforge, Airy Peak, and Shadowforge City. And no, Blizzard have not forgotten him because he just made an appearance in the story of Lorthamar and Thalyssra's wedding, having become good friends with Arator, who of course is the son of Turalyon and Alleria. Now, with the Dark Irons now fully in the Alliance, it will actually be an unprecedented time of peace for the dwarves. We may even have Shadowforge City, or as we know it, Blackrock Depths, but not full of enemies. Now that sure would be a change to witness. Then, not to forget what's above Shadowforge City, Azeroth's most iconic peak, Blackrock Mountain. It is mostly known by players as where we go to defeat Nefarian. Twice, once in Vanilla, once in Cataclysm. But now, there are some remnants of the Dark Horde. Other than that, it lies quite empty. This is the perfect location then for black dragons returning from the Dragon Isles to basically right some of their family's wrongs. Rathian could even sit on the mountain and watch over his best friend, Anduin, over his city, right? Watch over Stormwind. But really, when it comes to the Eastern Kingdoms, we know much of the lore that's going to drive the story, that it's going to be Stormwind, and it's not as rosy as you may expect. Stormwind poured its heart and soul into the Fourth War. It got to the point where they needed to call up peasants from Westfall and send them to the front line. And then they paid the ultimate price. Their king was taken away by the jailer. And he still has not returned. Crazy when you think about it, but yeah, from the perspective of people in Stormwind, Anduin's not been there for 5 years. Turalyon, he's a nice guy, right? Well, we certainly hope so, because he is effectively the reigning king. In patch 925, Greymane and Shaw, in a private moment, shared their concerns about what that could mean. Will he be a just king? Could his faith cloud his judgment? They seemed to pull back on that a little bit with the introduction to Dragonflight, but there still are breadcrumbs of future strife if Blizzard wants it. Okay, say he just gives the throne right back to Anduin when Anduin returns to us. Well, our golden boy is not going to be the same as when he left. His trauma response was to basically pawn his duties off and wander alone until he figures his shit out. His return will be a happy one, but it's one that will bring its own tension, and we have to question what darkness will linger in Anduin, or even how people will feel about his abdication. That's a big A-plot story thing. But what we really want from a world revamp is to see what's going to go on in those old-school human zones. And Blizzard sort of got the ball rolling. After the Human Heritage quest, we know that Westfall's issues are mostly ironed out politically. Anduin pardoned the Stonemasons, and Van Cleef disbanded the old gang and disavowed the remaining Defias' ways. But the remnants of that new Defias are pure, unjustified bandits and pirates. And yeah, pirating they'll do. We have the Night Squall, who is a mad night elf who wants to explore the other side of the planet, to sail beyond the Veiled Sea. He is currently making a federation of pirates, and he wants to get the Defias on board. In Duskwood, a mysterious necromancer, free of the Helm of Domination, was destroyed by the Night Watch, but he promised he was only the beginning. That means that Ravenhill is not yet clear of undead. So, there will be plenty for us to do between the politics, the bandits, the gnolls, the kobolds, the murlocs, the necromancers, and really all sorts. We could see revivals and continuations of hundreds of stories that made those zones so memorable, but rebuilt as beautifully as the Dragon Isles themselves. Kalimdor has seen so much action in the last decade. Orgrimmar was sacked twice. Cthulhu had this whole area covered. Uldum was opened. Teldrassil burned. The Sword of Sargeras, and really the list goes on. But the promise of a half-explored wilderness is still there. We know a dark power lies under Maradon, and it wants to unite the Centaur hordes, so they claim the entire continent. And we've got new Centaur models that Blizzard could use for that. Another big development is the Barrens, where the Mag'har teleported over from AU Draenor. And the crazy thing is, when they teleported over, several Botani were caught in that spell. When they arrived in Azeroth, they escaped to the Overgrowth in the Northern Barrens, which is where the Emerald Nightmare was manifesting on Azeroth. Isn't that a bit of a scary crossover? Just remember how in Warlords of Draenor we had to prevent a Botani invasion of Stormwind, and when you go into the deep lore of Draenor, we see that life unchecked can doom a planet. The west coast of the continent is littered with highborn ruins infested with Naga. Nazjatar was not the end, and now we're hearing that they have a prophecy about Ashara's return that I covered in another video. Already, we have Centaur, Botani, and Naga to fight. But also, there are many Titan ruins that would be fantastic to re-explore, now that we found out that Odin wasn't necessarily truthful to us all the time. Like, life did not come from Ungoro Crater, but we were told that back in Wrath of the Lich King. what the hell then? What was Ungoro for? Even in Uldum, we know the Waste Wanderers settled there, so we'll have guides if we ever return. But all that is secondary to who really owns Kalimdor, the Orcs and the Horde. And the Orcs have some soul-searching to do. As I mentioned earlier, the water in Durotar has become polluted by the goblins of Ashara. That is a political test for the Horde's new council. Instead of an Orc war chief calling the shots and rolling heads, now it'll be a whole thing to resolve. This will be a problem throughout the continent as the various Horde factions divide Kalimdor up. But for a race who founded the Horde and then brought the other races in, the Orcs need some time in the light. Especially after the Orc Heritage Quest reunited the clans while still keeping them distinct, a revamp is a good time to explore those clans further. But the biggest iceberg on the horizon, something WoW's never really satisfied us on, is faction conflict. The Night Elves are still a power to be reckoned with. They are in the process of growing what seems to be a new world tree, which could also mean a new city and a new place of power. Even if they don't end up in the same place of Teldrassil, why would they give up Darkshore? Why would they give up Ashenvale, where all their heritage lies? Surely then, we could have conflict, because the Orcs are still cutting down trees. Faction conflict might not be the A-plot going forward, but remember, conflict doesn't necessarily mean murdering each other. It could just be faction tension. You know what? Other MMOs, and sometimes even WoW, have done a pretty damn good job of writing a little political thriller when they really need to. Let's be real for a bit. Where can World of Warcraft go next? Like, honestly. Obviously the answer is many places. The Emerald Dream, the other side of Azeroth with all that Night Squall lore, the next cosmic realm, or perhaps the cosmos threats coming to us, which I think we would probably prefer. But really, a world revamp feels a bit evident. Every other day, somebody is finding a new datamined asset in-game. There aren't many explanations for all of these files just yet. It could easily be something in the process of 11.0, a soft reset of assets rather than core story. Maybe they will just piecemeal create more and more old world assets over several patches or expansions. Maybe this stuff is actually for new faction fortresses on the other side of Azeroth, and that's why Blizzard have been building them, adding them to the game files, but not putting them in the world. I suppose the best part, though, is that it brings potential to us. We're in a good place right now. We're in a really great expansion. The world is kind of being reset in a nice, calm way. Anything can happen next, and it's all quite exciting. But the one thing that Blizzard knows will hit hardest, the thing that they can market, the one thing that could be stronger than anything else for World of Warcraft in the public consciousness, is to reclaim some part of the place that it once had in gaming culture as a whole. And the way to do that would be to say, World of Warcraft is back. The world is back. Experience Azeroth after 30 years of evolution, built with modern tools, modern tech, modern gameplay. That's the ticket. And I think they're sort of on their way to doing that. One way or another. So what do you think? Do you think we are in for a world revamp? Why do you think Blizzard are making these assets? Do you think we'll get that revamp all at once as a big new expansion like the Cataclysm? Or perhaps do you think Blizzard would slowly roll through the world as side content as they produce patches? Or perhaps do we have a situation where maybe one of the main continents just is where the next big expansion takes place? Maybe Yrel and her Lightbound army come through the Dark Portal, and as a part of that process, much of the Eastern Kingdoms gets to be revamped. I'm not 100% sure, but I think there's a lot of potential. They've been making these assets, they've been making them for some reason, and right now, 700 people, 700 plus, are working on World of Warcraft. I don't want to say that anything is possible, but a lot more is possible than it used to be. And if, when talking about the resettlement of Gilneas, Steve Denuser said, "Oh no, that's the sort of thing we'd see in-game, not in a book," why would he have said that if they didn't plan on doing things of that scope in the game? I then say to you, when's the Undercity going to be fully fixed up? When are the Night Elves going to get their new city? When will Gilneas be reclaimed? I think these are all things that we will see in the game. The question then is, what else will come along with that? So let me know what you think. Thank you for watching today's video. This just shows how the world is brimming with potential. I'll see you next time.